They never saw me coming. Not because I was hiding. I was right there, in every meeting, every call, every project folder buried beneath Derek's executive signature. But no one looked past the blazer and glasses. No one listened to the quieter voice in the room. And honestly, that used to suit me just fine. I came into Halston and Reed 5 years ago with a resume they didn't fully understand. Ivy League environmental law, a stint with a federal regulatory agency, even a published paper on compliance frameworks in energy infrastructure. But boutique firms like this one didn't hire for brilliance, they hired for blendability. Derek, head of our regulatory division, liked people who made him look smart. I was a mirror with good lighting. I wasn't here to impress, not anymore. I was here to stabilize. The clients were real. Startups with carbon pledges they didn't understand, legacy companies trying to greenwash without getting caught, developers skipping environmental impact reports and hoping we'd find the loopholes. And I did. Quietly. Thoroughly. Every time. Derek made it a sport. How quickly he could summarize my research to a client, how casually he could drop my findings into a pitch deck without even a backward glance. He'd throw out a line like, "Our team caught this Tier 2 violation early," and grin like it had just occurred to him in the shower. I learned to stop flinching. I learned to nod. My desk was the one with neatly labeled folders and backup drives. I didn't keep photos, no mugs with cutesy slogans. Just a stack of green legal pads filled with timelines, citations, and agency contacts. I updated myself. People called me organized. Precise. Some joked I had an AI chip installed. Derek once introduced me to a client as our in-house oracle. She's not flashy, but she's never wrong. They laughed. I smiled. Internally, I noted the violation they were hiding in their water disposal log and filed it for follow-up. What people didn't understand about compliance was that it wasn't about rules. It was about patterns. You learned how real mistakes looked, how intentional negligence disguised itself in language, in tone. I once flagged an underground fuel tank permit error just by the way a client avoided eye contact on a Zoom call. Derek said I was paranoid. The client called 6 months later to say my paranoia had saved them $1.2 million in fines. Still, my name never made it into press releases. The promotions came and went, new hires introduced as rising stars, while I kept my desk by the emergency exit, a silent fixture. I got good at playing small. Better than I liked to admit. And yet, I loved the work. Not the people, not the politics, the process. The tension of translating law into structure, the relief of finding order inside chaos. When a project was on the brink of collapse, that's when I felt most awake. It was like solving a puzzle with a ticking clock, and I was the only one who heard it. There were moments, though, moments that stung more than I allowed. A partner once congratulated Derek in front of the whole team for building such a detail-oriented culture. He smiled, lifted his glass at the company party, and said, "It's all about leadership." My mouth was dry. I'd written the SPs myself, line by line, late at night while Derek played tennis with venture capitalists. Still, I stayed. I kept receipts. Not out of spite, at least, not at first. It was instinct. I believed in documentation, in hard records. Every memo, every email thread, every line of code in our compliance automation system bore a timestamp. It wasn't personal. It was procedure. But maybe part of me was waiting. Watching. Calculating in that same quiet way I handled clients, a kind of strategic patience that men like Derek mistook for passivity. Sometimes I wondered if they even remembered I was in the room. Sometimes I wondered if that was my greatest advantage. There was no announcement. Just a calendar invite. Performance review, 1 p.m. Conference room 3B. I already knew what it was about. We'd just closed the Hastings case, an oil and gas compliance nightmare with 100 potential violations buried under 10 years of sloppy filings. I'd spent months decoding their disaster, navigating state and federal overlaps, tracing where they'd buried noncompliance behind third-party subcontractors. In the end, we didn't just keep them out of court. We made them a model of reform. Derek hadn't done much. He flew to Austin twice, stood in front of a room of lawyers, and parroted my summary. But that was the game. Everyone saw it. More importantly, everyone said it. That's Maya's win. So I walked into that review meeting thinking maybe, just maybe, this was the moment. Not because I needed the title, but because I was tired of pretending I didn't. Derek was already seated, legs crossed like a man giving a TED Talk. Beside him, Andrea, HR director, always tight-lipped, always neutral. There were 2 coffees on the table. None for me. He smiled like we were old friends. First off, stellar work on Hastings, he said. Truly impressive. You held that ship together. I waited. That said, he continued, flipping to a sheet I'd never seen before. I want to talk about leadership. My spine didn't move, but something inside me did. Leadership, he repeated, isn't just about execution. It's about visibility. About energy. Presence. You're reliable, Maya. Incredibly so. But we're bringing in someone who's going to help us tell our story better, externally, you know? Pitch meetings, strategy calls, client-facing visibility. His smile didn't even dim. We're hiring a new director of compliance operations. You'll support them, same compensation for now. No title change. But I really see this as a growth moment for you. He looked at me like I should be grateful. Andrea didn't meet my eyes. I nodded. Not too fast. Not too slow. He tapped the paper like it meant something. We need to level up the brand, Maya. And that starts with faces people remember. I walked out without blinking. I passed Jennifer at reception, who smiled and mouthed good luck. I smiled back. I wanted to scream. But instead, I sat at my desk, pulled up our internal budget tracker, and clicked on a line item marked Consulting Expansion. A $60,000 onboarding package. Already approved. Already spent. He'd made the decision weeks ago. Probably while I was still wrangling Hastings into compliance. Maybe while I was still on site in Bakersfield, knee-deep in audit documents, emailing him updates he never read. Her name was Logan. MBA from somewhere trendy. 3 years at a branding firm. Her LinkedIn photo looked like an ad for startup wellness. On paper, she had no business running compliance. But Derek didn't care. She sparkled. The day she arrived, they held a welcome breakfast. I wasn't invited. I sat 2 glass walls away, reviewing the language in a boilerplate client contract that left us liable for a subcontractor's fuel storage violations. I flagged it. Sent the memo. No reply. That afternoon, Logan breezed by my desk with a casual, "Hey, you're Maya, right? I heard you're the brain." I looked up. Just trying to keep things legal. She laughed like I'd told a joke. "Can't wait to learn from you." I smiled. It wasn't her fault. She was a tool, not the hand holding it. But that night, when I got home, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I opened a new folder on my desktop, Review 2.0. Inside, I started filing things. Vendor invoices with missing attachments. Client projects with delayed timelines. Meeting minutes where Logan promised deliverables she didn't understand. Derek's expense reports, always slightly padded, always vaguely justified. Nothing illegal. Yet, I wasn't angry. Anger is loud, clumsy. This was quieter. A kind of hunger I hadn't felt in years. I watched. I listened. When Derek offered Logan a speaking spot at an industry panel I used to prep him for, I helped coordinate logistics and quietly corrected her misstatements before they went to print. I started showing up to early morning meetings. Not to participate, just to watch the room. Who rolled their eyes? Who took notes? Who covered for who? A client complained about delayed filings. I handled it personally, copied legal. Made sure the correction notice reflected who'd signed off late. I stopped correcting Derek's errors before they reached the client. Let the gaps show. I wasn't sabotaging anyone. I was just removing the insulation. And beneath all that gloss, the rot was showing. The software vendor's contract hadn't been renegotiated in 2 years. We were overpaying by 18%. I logged it. Derek approved a celebratory retreat after a mid-level contract renewal. The client hadn't even signed yet. I logged that too. I kept working. I kept smiling. I kept everything on paper. Because here's the thing they never understood about me. I don't need applause. I need leverage. It started with the invoices. Small things, really, payment requests lagging by 2 weeks, vendors sending follow-ups marked urgent. Logan shrugged it off as a systems glitch. Derek blamed growing pains. But I'd been here long enough to know how things moved when they were well managed. This wasn't a hiccup. This was rot. Our junior accountant, Eliza, started coming to me with questions she should have been asking the CFO. Do you know why we haven't paid Greenbank Labs yet? Was this budget code approved for a hospitality vendor? I answered what I could. Quietly added a new folder, billing irregularities. Then came the client calls. A biotech startup emailed twice, asking for their updated environmental impact analysis. Logan had promised it in the last meeting. She hadn't even opened the draft. Another firm asked why our final compliance report contradicted the figures we submitted to the state agency. The contradiction? A decimal point moved, a calculation rushed. Derek spun every error as a learning opportunity. We're evolving fast, he said in an all-hands meeting, and that means some bumps along the way. Everyone clapped. I didn't. I started documenting. Not out of malice. Just precision. Every email where a deadline was ignored. Every slide deck with copy-pasted data. Every moment a junior staffer was left to clean up a mess someone higher up had made. There was a proposal Logan sent to a high-profile client promising full environmental review and mitigation within 3 weeks. The timeline was absurd. I flagged it privately, then attached a PDF of the agency's minimum review period. Derek replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The client canceled 2 days later. I didn't delete the email thread. Derek began hosting what he called visibility lunches, catered rooftop gatherings with branded notebooks, stylized tote bags, and a lifestyle photographer. The kind of thing you'd expect from a wellness influencer, not a regulatory firm. The budget for brand engagement doubled in 1 quarter. I watched interns run financial analysis on biodegradable packaging while our server backups failed twice in a month. Meanwhile, our old clients, the ones we used to call legacy anchors, started slipping away. One transferred their file to a competitor without a call. Another cited delivery inconsistencies and ended a 5-year contract. I began compiling every exit email. Created a spreadsheet. Logged contract values, terms, exit reasons. No commentary. Just patterns. In meetings, I spoke less. I watched more. There was something liberating about silence. The way people filled it. I learned that Logan didn't understand the difference between federal and state-level spill protocols. I learned that Derek rarely read anything longer than a bullet point summary. I learned that 3 of our most profitable clients had stopped attending our quarterly briefings entirely, sending proxies instead. It wasn't just carelessness anymore. It was erosion. Structural. And still, I never broke protocol. Every file I saved was on the firm's shared drive. Every document I compiled was sourced from internal systems. Nothing stolen. Nothing leaked. Just arranged differently. Intentionally. I spent late evenings sorting. Building timelines. Not conclusions, just facts. There was one night I stayed past 9. The office was quiet, the sky outside a watercolor of city lights. I was reviewing a contract amendment Derek had signed without legal, adding a non-binding clause that exposed us to indirect liability. It was subtle. Dangerous. Likely something he didn't understand. I stared at his digital signature for a full minute. And in that moment, something shifted. Not anger. Not vindication. Clarity. This wasn't just neglect. This was a system dependent on being unexamined. A house of polished glass with no foundation. I wasn't outside of it. I was under it, holding it up. And I was done. Not loudly. Not with some grand confrontation. But with precision. I reviewed our ownership structure. Noted which partners had real voting power and which had been diluted over the years. I bookmarked the firm's incorporation documents. I read up on shareholder agreements and buyout clauses. Not for action. Just information. A habit. Some people collect art. I collect leverage. By the time Derek launched his Vision series, a weekly newsletter filled with vague aphorisms about innovation and culture, I already knew half the staff was considering other offers. They confided in me. They always had. I just listened better now. I said nothing. Not to HR. Not to legal. Not to my few remaining allies. But inside, A quiet machine had started turning. Retaliation is loud. And loud gets noticed. Loud gets squashed. I didn't need a scene. I needed structure. So I started with people. Not the ones who orbited Derek for career gravity, but the quiet ones. The analysts who worked late and spoke rarely. The assistants who covered gaps no one thanked them for. I'd always seen them, but now I started acknowledging them, not just their presence, but their patterns. There was Jordan, a junior staffer barely 2 years in. He'd been thrown under the bus during a client call when a draft report went out without legal review. It had Derek's timestamp all over it. But in the meeting, Derek leaned back, shook his head, and said, "That one slipped through. We're mentoring our younger team." Jordan looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He didn't argue. He apologized. Then he stayed 2 hours late cleaning up someone else's mistake. The next morning, I stopped by his desk with coffee and asked him to walk me through the version history of that report. He hesitated, then opened the file, nervous. I didn't scold. I didn't correct. I just pointed out the signature dates, the internal review log, the metadata. We both knew what it showed. "You're good at this," I said, simply. He nodded. Said nothing. But 2 days later, when I needed a spreadsheet cross-checked against internal billing tags, he offered before I asked. It was a small thing. But small things are where movements begin. I made mental notes. I was still doing all the heavy lifting under Derek's name. I smiled. She smiled back, almost apologetically. "You ever think about going out on your own?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I'm paying attention." That night, I enrolled in a night course at Berkeley Extension, mergers and acquisitions, legal structures, and strategic planning. 8 weeks. 1 evening per week. Online. Discreet. To anyone else, it would look like continuing education. A checkbox. To me, it was reconnaissance. The instructor, a former acquisitions attorney, spoke about control in terms of silence, how the most powerful moves were ones that left no fingerprints until the ink was dry. I took notes religiously. Back at the firm, Derek doubled down on spectacle. He sent an all-staff memo about reshaping the future of consulting and announced an off-site brand retreat in Tahoe, yoga instructors, thought leadership workshops, drone footage included. The invite arrived as we missed 2 quarterly deadlines and lost another long-term client. I declined the retreat. Cited family obligations. No one questioned it. Instead, I scheduled quiet lunches. Not many. Just enough. I met with Lena, our sustainability analyst who'd recently started looking drained in meetings. I asked how she was holding up. She paused, gave me a tight smile, and said, honestly, "I don't know what we're doing anymore." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She started venting, cautiously, then more freely, about changing metrics mid-report, about being asked to fudge emissions estimates for presentation clarity. I didn't tell her what to do, but I showed her how I document. I offered a template. She accepted it. Trust, I've learned, doesn't come from power. It comes from precision. By the 6th week of my Manda course, I could read a term sheet in under 3 minutes. I understood what clauses Derek had likely never even glanced at: drag-along rights, convertible options, silent dilution. I started researching who owned what, not just publicly, but quietly. The old partners. The early investors. The people who'd stepped back, but never fully left. They weren't active, but they still held keys. I reached out to one, a man named Russell who'd retired to Napa. We met over lunch on neutral ground. I didn't pitch anything. I just asked about the early days, the founding documents. He talked wistfully. At the end, he said, "If Derek tanks this place, I hope someone with brains is ready to catch it." I thanked him. Said I was just learning. He looked at me carefully. "You're not just learning," he said. "You're waiting." I smiled. Maybe both. He laughed once, quietly, and paid the check. Back at work, Logan announced a new firm-wide initiative called Vision Circles, bi-weekly meetings to align our energy with our values. The first session was scheduled during 3 overlapping client deadlines. Half the staff skipped it. No one was fired. That told me everything I needed to know. The cracks were deepening. Not fast, but predictably. Predictability is leverage. And I was starting to collect mine, one piece at a time. The warning came in a sideways comment. Claire, the former client now on the advisory board, messaged me after a conference. I heard Derek's been sniffing around private capital. That true? She asked. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with Eliza under the pretense of helping her review old tax reports. I asked about the Q4 burn rate. She hesitated, then opened a spreadsheet and sighed. We've got maybe 6 months if no new retainers come in. Derek's been running heavy on the credit line. I nodded like I already knew. In truth, I'd suspected. But now it was confirmed. The firm was bleeding. Not just leaking, hemorrhaging. Derek had been so focused on optics, he didn't realize he'd built a house out of paper and handed out lighters. That night, I pulled up the LLC documentation I'd quietly updated weeks ago, not for action, just observation. I checked the cap table again. Reviewed silent partner clauses. Reread the dilution history. It was all there. The firm's value had dropped by nearly 40% since the Hastings case. We had no new contracts signed in the last quarter. 2 major clients had left. The brand retreat costs alone could have covered 6 months of payroll. Derek didn't need to know I knew. Instead, I reached out quietly in layers. First, I contacted a fund manager at Viridian Capital, a sustainability-focused private equity firm that had previously courted some of our clients. I asked for a casual meeting, told them I was doing research for a class project. The manager, a woman named Talia, raised an eyebrow but played along. Over lunch, I laid out a hypothetical. Say there's a mid-sized environmental consultancy, I said. Bleeding cash. Poor leadership. But excellent talent buried under the dysfunction. Say it has just enough brand equity to stay attractive, but not enough stability to survive another quarter. Talia listened. And say, hypothetically, I continued, you could buy in now, quietly, before the valuation tanks entirely. You get IP, client lists, and a clean way in. She folded her napkin slowly. And who runs it afterward? I looked her in the eye. Not who's running it now. She nodded once. Send me something. Hypothetically. The following week, I created a syndicate proposal. Not through me, through a proxy I'd arranged months ago, a small LLC registered under my cousin's name in British Columbia, legally separate, clean history, no visible ties to Halston and Reed. The LLC would represent a silent stakeholder consortium aiming to rescue a declining regulatory firm. Through the proxy, I outlined a soft acquisition plan with limited equity exposure and full management rights upon purchase. Talia reviewed it, passed it up the chain. No alarms. Step 2, the ex-clients. I met with 2 of them in quiet cafes far from downtown, one who'd been burned by Derek's delays, another who'd left because of Logan's strategic realignment. I didn't pitch them a return. I pitched them a future. Imagine, I said, a consultancy led by people who actually read the law, who don't need buzzwords to meet deadlines, who don't outsource ethics. They laughed, bitterly at first. Then thoughtfully. I showed them the structure, low entry equity, advisory roles only, veto rights on future leadership hires. A chance to rebuild what they needed, not what Derek promised. Both signed non-binding letters of intent within a week. Just enough for Talia's board to greenlight a silent bid. The timing, as always, was everything. At the firm, Derek had started dropping hints about strategic conversations and fresh capital possibilities. He told the staff in a town hall, we're exploring options to scale, to expand our reach, build global connections. Translation: he was desperate, but still clinging to the wheel. What he didn't realize was that his insistence on majority control was killing every deal behind the scenes. PE firms don't invest in egos. They invest in systems. And Derek had none. I leaked nothing. I waited. Meanwhile, I reviewed every operating agreement, every buyout clause, every employee contract with conversion rights. I mapped them into a flowchart, who owned what, how much it would cost to trigger reallocation, and what thresholds could be crossed with board votes alone. It was a chessboard, and he was too busy talking to see it moving beneath him. Finally, the trap set itself. Viridian submitted a bid through the Proxy LLC, not under their own name. The offer was precise: assume debt, offer minor cash equity to maintain optics, and install operational leadership of the firm's choosing. Derek thought it was a miracle. A buyer at last. But he hated the clause, full management turnover. He pushed back. Tried to counter. Offered joint control. Threatened to walk. I had anticipated that too. The two ex-clients, now key strategic anchors on the advisory note, told Derek they wouldn't return unless the deal went through as written. Talia's team quietly hinted they'd walk if he didn't accept within 2 weeks. Suddenly, Derek wasn't a negotiator. He was a bottleneck. He held a partner meeting behind closed doors. Tried to rally support. But most of them were tired. Some were scared. A few just wanted out. They voted 5-2 in favor of accepting the deal. The offer was signed. He never knew that behind the LLC name, I was waiting. Not to humiliate him. Not to gloat. Just to fix what he broke, properly, legally, and without noise. That's the difference between revenge and precision. Revenge is emotional. Precision is inevitable. It was raining the morning of the meeting. Not a heavy storm, just that gray, stubborn San Francisco drizzle that soaks you without warning. I arrived early, dry beneath my umbrella, and stepped into the glass conference room that had so often reflected Derek's silhouette instead of mine. I sat at the head of the table. No ceremony, no announcement. Just a thick folder in front of me and a second copy beside the spare chair, the one reserved for him. The partners filtered in first. Russell joined via video call, his screen glowing at the far end like a distant witness. A few junior staffers peeked through the glass walls. No one spoke loudly. There was a hush to the space, like something sacred or irreversible was about to unfold. At 9:03, Derek walked in, phone in hand, barely glancing at anyone. He froze mid-stride when he saw me in his seat. "Morning," I said, evenly. "Please have a seat." He blinked once. "What's this?" I gestured toward the folder in front of him. Final terms. The board voted. The acquisition was accepted last night. He didn't sit. Just stood there, damp around the collar, gripping the edge of the chair. "What acquisition?" "The one you signed under duress," I said gently. "You insisted on majority control, so the offer adjusted, removing you from operational leadership. The advisory clause was activated this morning." He looked at the pages like they were written in a language he no longer spoke. "This is a hostile takeover," he muttered. "No," I replied. "It's a legal one. Fully compliant. You were given notice. You were offered options. You declined them." Someone cleared their throat. I think it was Andrea. She'd already seen the documents. I'd walked her through them 3 days ago. She hadn't said much, just nodded and asked if she could stay on. I told her yes. Finally, Derek sat down. The chair creaked slightly under his weight, like it too wasn't sure how to hold him. I opened the folder and began. Effective immediately, the firm will operate under a revised leadership structure. I'll serve as interim managing director. Our new board includes representatives from Viridian Capital and 2 former strategic clients, now formal advisors. All contracts will be reviewed for compliance, and transparency reports will be issued quarterly. Derek said nothing. His eyes darted over the paperwork, searching for a loophole that wasn't there. I continued. There will be no layoffs today. No dramatic rebranding. Just clarity. The goal isn't to erase what was built here. It's to stabilize it legally, ethically, structurally. That begins now. Across the table, Russell smiled faintly on his video screen. "Told you she was waiting," he said. The staff outside the room watched as Derek stood again, slower this time, and walked out without a word. His shoulders didn't square. His head didn't turn. He disappeared like a man realizing the building was never his, only rented from consequences. When the door closed, I looked up at the room. Some faces were stunned. A few were pale. But none looked angry. I placed my palms flat on the table. You've all been working under a system that rewarded flash over function. That ends here. I won't make speeches. I won't make promises I can't audit. What I will do is listen, document, and fix. No one clapped. That wasn't the point. But no one left either. And in that quiet moment, with the rain ticking softly against the windows and the weight of what we'd built finally balanced in the open, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not revenge, just peace. I didn't fire Derek. It would have been easy. Just a signature. Just a line in the new org chart. But easy wasn't the point. He came into my office a week after the takeover, face hollowed out by silence. He didn't ask for his job. He didn't argue. He just sat down across from me, still clinging to the idea that there might be a negotiation buried somewhere beneath my desk. "There's a job in Denver," he said, staring at his hands. "Friend of mine runs a consultancy there. Less public-facing." I nodded once. He looked up. "You're not going to drag me through this?" "I don't need to," I said. "You already did that to yourself." He hesitated. "You're going to want me to resign?" "No," I said. "I'm going to let you choose whether you do." The silence stretched out between us. I didn't fill it. Eventually, he exhaled. "I'll send something by Friday." "Take your time," I replied. He walked out slower than usual. He didn't come back. The resignation letter was short, professional. No apologies, no excuses. Just an end. The press wanted a statement. Talia from Veridian forwarded me 3 interview requests from business journals. "Everyone loves a reversal story," she said. But I declined them all. I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. I wasn't interested in applause. The firm needed repairs. That's where I started. The first thing I did was cancel the drone video package Derek had ordered for his leadership relaunch. The vendor hadn't shot a single frame yet. Saved us $7,000. Next, I reinstated weekly compliance training, not mandatory, not performative. Real workshops. Real case studies. No pizza. Just accountability. I created a rotating review board for client contracts. Not just legal, but operational, financial, and cultural review. If a deal didn't feel aligned, we didn't take it. We lost 2 leads that way. We also gained a reputation that finally meant something. People adjusted. Slowly, but noticeably. Logan handed in her resignation 2 months in. No drama. Just a polite note and a bouquet of succulents. She took a branding role at a wellness tech firm. I wished her well. I didn't look back. Jordan, the junior staffer Derek once threw under the bus, was promoted to compliance lead within the quarter. He still asked too many permission-based questions, but he was learning. And more importantly, he knew how to listen. I restructured the bonus system. No more top-heavy commissions. No more vague visibility points. Bonuses were tied to measurable outcomes, deadlines met, errors prevented, clients retained. People who had been invisible started standing a little taller. One day, Lena stopped me in the hallway and said, "It's strange. I feel like I can finally exhale." That meant more to me than any article would have. Russell called me occasionally from Napa. "You fixed it," he said once. "You did it without blood." "There's enough of that in every other industry," I told him. "We're supposed to be the grown-ups." Ownership changed something in me. Not in the way I expected. I didn't feel more powerful. I felt more responsible. Every day, I understood a little more why the previous system had failed, not from malice, but from 1,000 small avoidances. People didn't cut corners because they were evil. They cut corners because no one ever held the map. So I drew a new one. Slowly. With help. And still, I didn't seek credit. I still took the stairs. I still made my own coffee. I still reviewed contracts line by line, even when I could have passed them off. Because I never wanted to become the thing I'd outlasted. The office felt different now. Calmer. Leaner. Honest. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real. 6 months after the acquisition, I sat in my office, now properly furnished, no longer tucked by the fire exit, and reviewed a contract of my own. Not a client deal. Not a vendor renewal. My own employment agreement. Drafted by Andrea, approved by the board, waiting for my signature. It outlined my responsibilities. My limits. My pay modestly adjusted. A clause about stepping down if the firm's ethics were compromised under my leadership. I read every word. And then I signed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted the paper trail. I wanted to be accountable. I wanted to be bound by something stronger than ambition. After all, That's what this was always about. Not revenge. Not titles. Just the quiet kind of justice, the kind you write yourself. People assume power looks like a raised voice, a slammed door, a decisive blow. But in my experience, real power is patient. It waits in the margins. It listens longer than anyone else can bear. It survives the room where it's ignored. I used to think silence was a form of weakness. That staying quiet made me complicit in my own invisibility. But silence, real, intentional silence, is a tool. It's where the mind sharpens. It's where strategy is born. Everything I did slowly, deliberately. Not because I lacked the fire, but because I learned where fire burns best at the right time in the right place, with no one watching the smoke. People like Derek mistook composure for passivity. They didn't understand that control isn't something you wield, it's something you build. Layer by layer, until the foundation you stand on is too solid to shake. I never wanted revenge. I wanted restoration. There is a difference. Revenge is hungry. It demands recognition. It needs to be seen. Restoration is quiet. It works behind closed doors. It fixes what others left broken. I never told anyone how close the firm had come to collapse. I didn't gloat when we stabilized. I didn't rewrite history. I just wrote the next chapter, one policy, one contract, one staff meeting at a time. Because justice isn't the moment when someone gets what they deserve. Justice is when systems stop rewarding the people who never earned their place in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, it's when someone who's always been underestimated finally decides not to be invisible anymore. I walk differently now. Not faster. Not louder. Just more certain. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm not willing to compromise. The firm doesn't need a hero. It needs a compass. And I've learned how to point true north. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment in the boardroom, the stunned silence, the realization shifting across faces as they finally saw me. Not for the first time, but for the first time without filters. That's the moment I hold on to. Not the transaction. Not the contract. The recognition. Quiet. Undeniable. It taught me something simple. You don't have to shout to change everything. You just have to be ready when no one else is. This morning, I came in early. Just me and the city, still shaking off the fog. I stood at the window with my coffee and watched the bay reflect the light as it broke over the water, slow, deliberate, golden. It didn't announce itself. It didn't beg to be seen. But it changed the entire sky.